Hello, welcome to our live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are discussing activism, the psychology of activism. Now, we chose this topic today because we have throughout this Hangout series of the Living Income Guaranteed been sharing a lot about why activism maybe is not the actual way to create change, and how we have to be political, and how, for example, we've talked about previously on Occupy Wall Street, people that have been part of Occupy Wall Street have come and shared their own experiences, but we haven't yet specifically discussed what happens within ourselves, our psyche, our mind, when it comes to standing up for what is right. What happens within ourselves as part of society, as an individual that, you know, decides that change is necessary, and why is it that we almost sabotage ourselves when it comes to social change, changing ourselves, standing up for what is right? Why is activism as such not being lived in a practical and supportive manner, for example? So we will be discussing these aspects at an individual level, social level, our own experiences as well, because, you know, we are a group of people that have come to the conclusion that change in this world won't happen only by, you know, only a few individuals in political realms or corporate realms making these changes. It has to come from ourselves as individuals. So because this, we're getting some noises from Kim, but Kim is our guest today from South Africa. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Marlen.
Thanks for being here. Thanks a lot for being here. And today we will essentially discuss part of your own research and what you've also experienced for yourself. Because as I was mentioning, we are a group of people, regular individuals around the world, that have joined in within this realization that, yes, we require to change. We require to make changes in the political arena, how our economic system change, but what process essentially is involved as well at an individual level. So let's first begin discussing why is it that activism, what's your perspective on it in terms of why not many people want to stand up for change, or why do they see activism as maybe something not so positive to be associated with? What's going on there in our minds?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question, because, I mean, the way I look at it, it's like everyone can, to a certain degree, see that there's problems in our reality. I mean, there's like widespread poverty. There's now the Israeli-Palestine conflict that's flaring up again, where children are being killed. There's pollution by the corporations that we trust. There is corruption. There is deception. As, for instance, was mentioned in the previous Hangout, that there is, I mean, deception within marketing, within the products that we buy. So, I mean, why is it that we're not standing up to all of these things? This has to have, like, psychological factors to it. So, I mean, if you then have a look at the people in our world that claim or say that they're standing up for all of this, which is the activists and the activist realm, and you kind of look at it from, like, you step back for a moment and you place it in perspective, as place it in the context of our society as a whole, and you ask that question of why is it that activists aren't reaching everyone with their message? Because, you know, I mean, you might have already heard it in many conversations that you've had with the people close to you, where people actually say, like, yes, these are problems and I want them to be solved, and I don't like seeing that in my world. But then what people generally say is like, but I don't know how to solve these things. Like, what do I know? Or who am I to, you know, to say anything about this really, or do anything about this? So when you then have a look at, you know, why is it that we're not getting involved in activist groupings or in activism? I mean, what I have found when researching this point is that Well, first of all, activists have an image problem, meaning that, I mean, if you have a look at activists, people basically associate them with the kind of grunge-looking, militant-looking personality who goes to protests and who has this unhygienic look to them. And it's just an image that people don't want to be associated with because it has social implications. If we start, you know, not taking care of ourselves anymore and like becoming militant in that way, is that we know we would push people away from us because nobody wants to be associated with a negative image such as that. So this is where activists basically haven't yet applied introspection, or haven't yet really taken a step back and looked at themselves and asked themselves the question of, you know, why is it really that I'm not getting through to people? You know, because this is how I'm seeing is it's kind of an ego problem that activists are dealing with, where they don't actually want to change themselves. Like, they're still holding on to this image that they have of themselves as a fighter, a protester, you know, someone who stands up, and they want to show it in their exterior representation in this reality, where they're not considering and they don't want to consider how that image really affects other people, and how that image gets in the way of them really transferring their message to other people.
Yeah, I also consider that this is part of why we are individuals in society. We tend to create this kind of categories and personalities, types of people. And I mean, I've gotten comments from people that know what we do that have associated me with that kind of people, like, oh, so you go to protests and you are that kind of a person that goes and shouts at the government. And I'm like, no, not at all. That's actually what I'm seeing, that it hasn't worked at all throughout my life and throughout my own investigation of how the world system operates. And it's very interesting that because of that idea, then people, you know, as you're mentioning, we don't like being associated with something negative or that is dubious, rebellious. And we certainly have to clear up the image of what real activism would mean, which is, as you're saying, not going to protests and so forth, but how to begin that point of change within ourselves, which is not kind of tagging each other, identifying each other as human beings based on an image or our likes or preferences, but really consider, okay, what are the points that are required to be changed? You're mentioning like the problems in this world. I guess we can all agree with that, but why do we only find or leave this point of change to these few individuals calling themselves activists? So why have you also, or what's your perspective on another aspect, which is that decision to stand up? Sometimes what we've seen is that only the people that stand up have had bad experiences, let's say, with the government or with the economy itself, or have experienced high levels of injustice, social injustice. And so that becomes the starting point of wanting to change. Why is this emotional starting point a problem, would you say?
Well, if we have a look at our own interactions with our environment and the way we live our life, and we have specifically a look at the moments that we ourselves go into an emotional reaction. I mean, what happens is that we tend to make decisions, or we say things to the people around us from the starting point of that emotion, which is very impulsive. And afterwards, we even often regret our decisions, and we look back and we think, well, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that, because, you know, when our mind is more clear, we can see that the decisions that we made out of emotion were actually not what was best for ourselves. Because when you're in an emotion, I mean, you may find that, I mean, it's like you're blinded from everything, and that all that exists within you is those few thoughts and that specific emotional experience. Take, for instance, I mean, if you feel like the system has somehow done something unjust to you, and you lost a lot of money, and somehow you felt that things you trusted within the system you can't trust anymore. So the thoughts running through your head would be, you know, the system is so corrupt and unjust, and they have to pay for what they did to me, and I must show everyone how unjust this system is, and it's just unbelievable, and I can't believe how corrupt people are, fueled by an emotional experience of, for instance, anger. So I mean, this is like a mantra that goes on within the mind of the individual, and it becomes like a box that people place themselves in their mind, where they just kind of bounce from corner to corner in their own mind within this limited reality of thoughts and just one energy experience within themselves, and that sabotages them to really, I mean, see what is really going on, and for instance, specifically what is necessary to solve the problems that there exist. I mean, because yes, there are problems, but if we react to those problems with emotions, we are not going to see solutions, because within that emotion all we see is the problem. We just hold on to the problem. There's a problem, and that's the issue with activism, from my perspective, is that they simply only focus on the problem, and they expect that by yelling, making loud noises, and handing out petitions and doing these impulsive acts, basically, that the problem is somehow going to be solved, because somehow the system's going to hear them and the system's going to change by itself, which is sadly not the case, which we can see clearly, you know, simply by looking at history, and how history tells us that activism has never been the solution to reform our reality.
Yeah, and in anger, we unite within that emotional experience, and what happens is that when we create that polarity of, well, I am the victimized one, then I am standing against the powers that be, and I see them as a problem, and there, I mean, we remain in this dialectic, the battle against those in the top, at the top. And in this, we only seek to kind of take that position and recreate the same system, which is really not the solution either, because as long as we continue only fighting those that we perceive are in power, you know, we become powerless, as we are not really focusing on solutions. In anger, in emotions, we don't really lay down practical solutions, political plans, in essence, or join together as a political party to create the solutions that we all see is required. Why? Because it's much easier also to blame and to not have the actual work laid out and the structure for change, which is what the Living Income Guaranteed is actually for and why we're here. So let's look at a moment to the questions, comments. Hi to everyone watching. Yes, the comments are live. To Risa and Camille, thanks for watching. We have a question from Anna Briggs, and she's saying, how about other types of activists? Like, for example, the people working with stopping the cove slaying of dolphins in Japan. These small groups who have core points that they're working with and focusing on. What's your perspective on this?
My perspective on that is that it's similar to the point that we've actually discussed just now with regards to how emotions fuel our actions within and as the expression of activism, in that these people focusing on the problem happening in the cove, which is where, with all the dolphins being slaughtered, I mean, if you look at it, you know, why is it that these people are standing up for the dolphins? It's because they care in their heart about the dolphins, but that's all that they care about. I mean, it's like, because of their emotional experience of care and of compassion and of God knows what, pity and love for animals and for dolphins maybe specifically, they're just focused and funneling their attention solely on these dolphins and on this one specific tiny problem, rather than, you know, taking a step back, because and seeing that these emotions, even emotions like, you know, caring about animals, it is directing your entire focus and attention on just one point, where you're missing the entirety of reality, and you're missing the point of how this reality is an interconnected, multidimensional web of patterns coming together, where you need to find a way to redirect and reform the entire pattern or the basic foundational layout to be able to fix problems such as the cove. Because, I mean, also the people in the cove are, for instance, more focusing on like one aspect or one dimension of how to solve this problem, meaning, for instance, they would approach the companies who buy the dolphin meat and ask them to stop buying meat in an attempt to try and stop the people from slaughtering dolphins by lessening the demand for dolphin meat. I'm just, you know, giving an example. But what they're, for instance, not seeing or looking at is, you know, where are the people going to go and what are the people going to do who are slaughtering the dolphins for a living? Because they're doing that to make money, not because they so enjoy killing animals. No, because they need to make money. So what are they going to do? I mean, this is a big point that, for instance, activists also fail to realize, is that, you know, people in companies who abuse reality in one way or another, they're in it for survival, and we need to find ways to give those people that survival before we kick them out of their jobs, basically.
Yeah, that's very important, and I've also received sometimes comments from people like, will me becoming a vegan or a vegetarian support with the abuse toward animals and so forth? So in this, once again, we are only focusing on a very small aspect, not to diminish the abuse that actually goes toward animals. Of course, we want to stop it, but we necessarily link it to the economic realm, which means there is money that people require to live. There is a lot of people that depend on the meat industry, for example. So we cannot really focus all our attention and efforts on these sectionalized types of solutions, which many NGOs, for example, are very interested on. And what I also see is that activism fails in this sectarianism of only the environment aspect, or the anti-corporate aspect, or the GMO aspect. You know, these are all important topics, but what we have to consider is that all these topics, all these problems, in essence, and the division within the realm of activism fails to look at the political aspect of it. And what happens is that we miss the bigger picture, as Kim was saying. So thanks, Anna, for your question. I'd like to ask you, Kim, about what happens at an individual level that we tend to separate self-interest, or what is best for myself, from the collective interest. Why don't we see it as the same thing? And why do we tend to live in this kind of cage modality of I only care for those around me and I don't really care about the world? What's going on here?
Well, to answer that question, I mean, we should ask ourselves that question of why is it that, you know, I separate me and my life from everyone else and everything else in this world, where, for instance, I can make statements like, I care about animals, and I care about what happens to the planet, and I care about what companies do to this world, and I care about nature, and I don't want nature to be exploited, etc. But I mean, why am I not moving myself practically in physical reality to actually solve these problems that I'm seeing and that I'm claiming to want to solve? So, I mean, a point that I would look at, for instance, is how from the moment that we're born in this world, we are trained by, you know, history and the previous generations, our parents, the system that we're born into, to look out for our own survival, to build a life, to set goals for ourselves, to find these things important, like having hobbies and having friends and making babies and having a family. I mean, we're bombarded by every influence in our world to value these personal things above all. I mean, even the global structure, like, you know, companies are participating within brainwashing the individual to only care about its own personal survival and to create this kind of bubble reality around itself, which we call consumerism. I mean, this is the entire problem, is that our whole world is set up to create that division and separation within the individual itself, between me, I, and my life and my world, and everybody and everything else.
Yeah, and we have a comment from Matt's VP. He's saying, yes, it's really act division, as activism does not consider where and how these consequences manifest. Then again, it's to bring it back to ourselves and see how one is part of the problems in one's own life. And yes, we might sometimes see that, yes, there is animal abuse, or there is the devastation of the Amazon based on wood and everything that we require to survive, or fracking. You know, there are many, many problems, but we also tend to lose perspective here on the real interest at hand, which is economic. It is a political problem then. And why is it that as activists we don't tend to look at politics, for example, as the real solution? So we pretty much endorse what we can call political activism, which is, instead of fighting one single corporation, fighting one single slaying of dolphins, fighting only Monsanto, for example, why not looking at where the real decisions are made, which is politics, which is obviously the legal system, and all of this will only come through, for example, what we propose as the Living Income Guaranteed proposal, which is providing people money to live so that that survival point that you're mentioning, Kim, is able to be eradicated. And then we can certainly maybe specialize ourselves in various aspects of our reality that require solution. But that first point of giving money to everyone is what we see as the main point of interest, and that we all as human beings should be focused on. Because, I mean, who doesn't need money to live? So here I would like to ask you then about this, because we, as you're mentioning, we live in this consumer society. We want solutions now, now, now. So how do you link, for example, the actions that activists maybe bring forth, linked to this idea that, well, if I yell, maybe the solution will come fast and right now? What's your perspective on this?
Okay, so what I was thinking about just now while you were speaking was that basically it's interesting that of how activism right now, with the yelling and the screaming and I want attention, is creating what that is creating within the mind of the individual in society, the average Joe, so to speak. And you have to look at, for instance, what we are presenting with a living income. Because basically what we are doing is activism. I mean, it's real activism, it's practivism in a way, you know, because we offer real solutions, we go and investigate. And it's practical, it's down to earth, and anyone can join and stand for this. So, I mean, it's fascinating when you have a look at what the concept of activism has created within the mind of the individual, which is an absolute kind of resistance to anything that has to do with moving ourselves to really practically stand up in this world and stand for something. Because immediately when we think about that, an image pops into our mind of this activist with a fucking torch or a grenade or a Molotov cocktail with a scarf around their neck and protesting, and police clubbing them down and, you know, from that moment our mind goes into this panic of, well, I don't want that. I don't want to be that or in that situation. So, I'm not going to stand for anything, and I'm not going to stand up. I'm not going to do anything to, fix this world, because that means that I'm going to end up like that image that is imprinted in my brain of what it means to be an activist. But here we are basically saying and showing to people that, that's not what real activism is about. That is actually just another trick of the system, or another fluke of the system keeping itself intact, another emotional outbursts of us human beings, kind of keeping ourselves boxed into this emotional state of fear, of standing up. But what real activism is just simple. It's like, very down to earth, like investigate your reality, interact with your reality, still live your life, only now with a little bit more awareness, and push yourself to find ways to reach people. It doesn't have to be through pressure or resistance or fighting or protesting, not at all.
Yes, and also, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I hope that's the question, sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's many points here that open up. What I was also considering is that things that we tend to see in the media kind of perpetuate this image that most people fear of. I mean, yes, I wouldn't like to be there standing in front of Wall Street and being incarcerated, and that is linked with the idea of, oh, these people want change. So therefore, social change is associated with this idea of, I'm going to be against the law, I'm doing something wrong, therefore I rather remain in this comfortable bubble of not changing. And as such, as you're saying, it's like one trick of the same system that we have created in order to fear change, to kind of not want to be part of that mob mentality, so to speak, of I want change, because that's the only kind of idea that we've had thus far throughout history of change. So that's why we're doing this here as well, in terms of proposing change, that, as you're saying, it doesn't take me to do something else other than educating myself and joining forces, meaning joining with people that see that the actual solution is required to be political at all times. And within the context of the economic system in itself, instead of diverting our efforts to yelling, screaming, or only the various sections or factions of activism itself. So we have a question or a comment from Halloween. Sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. We are discussing about the psychology of activism. So if you have any questions, comments, please place them in the comment section and questions. So Kim, in relation to, well, also I'd like to mention that we tend to separate ourselves from the collective, meaning that my life is apparently, I live my life, I earn my money, I pay my taxes, so I am an individual that is taking self-responsibility for this world. But why is it that this idea or limited idea of I do my duty, so to speak, becomes also a limiting point within the idea of change? Why is it that we kind of prevent or sabotage ourselves in even questioning this that we do in our lives and preventing us from even considering change? What goes on in our minds? Why do we fear change, so to speak?
Well, from my perspective, it's, again, the same point of having this idea and image imprinted and branded in our brain of what change means. Like, it's just how our mind kind of works and functions, is that immediately when we are faced with a concept or a word, it's like a picture comes up in our mind as our mind's way of trying to understand what is being said or understand the concept that we're dealing with. So for instance, when you suggest change to someone, or change, yes, the concept of change, what kind of images would that come up or bring up and activate in our mind is, for instance, the image of protests, revolution, war, conflict, separation, fighting, because those are kind of the ideas and images that have been imprinted through history as the things that have brought about change. Change has always come through some form of conflict in our world and our reality. It's only been through conflicts like revolutions and civil wars and all sorts of conflicts that things have changed in our world, that our world has somehow developed more laws and regulations that try to make life for specific people more comfortable. So I mean, that is, for instance, how we as people in this world, in a way, exist within a constant fear, subconscious fear of change, because of all those ideas that we've associated with the concept and idea and principle of change and what it means in our own mind, where unfortunately it's like we can't see any other way in which change could or would possibly be able to manifest in this world. So, within this kind of fear state, we're like, okay, you know what, let me just live my life and do my things and hope that my life will turn out okay and that I will be able to somehow still survive in this world and that my kids will be okay. And, if I have that, it'll be fine. I don't want change because I don't want conflict in my life.
That's a key association there, like change with conflict, and how within this idea we miss out, have we ever really had any real genuine change? I mean, if any revolution had worked, would we still be looking at changes required? Of course not. Yeah, you were mentioning something?
I lost it, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, sorry for that, but we are kind of getting to the last bit of our hangout. And I would like to ask you, in terms of, our ability to, first of all, change ourselves, because we tend to see, as you're mentioning, this idea of changing in our minds, projection based on history, but why do we say that also change at an individual is required? What do I have to what would you suggest for everyone watching as well that has experienced precisely what you have described, of that fear of conflict, fear of battles, wars that we see as change, which is not real change? So even from your own situation, how have you come to transcend these usual associations at a mind level of change equals conflict equals war to a real process of change? How have you looked at yourself?
Well, it's actually fascinating to have a look at that point of how change has influenced me within myself and my life, and how, for instance, from the first moment that I became aware of, I have to change who I am inside of myself to be able to change anything within this world. I have to, in a way, break free from my accepted patterns that I live to be able to consider another way, as well within myself as well as without myself. So I mean, when I look at the beginning of my process within this principle of change, so to speak, is that it's funny to see that the first thing that came up within myself and my world and reality was conflict, was resistance, was fighting. It's like a war zone that was going on, where I went into conflict with everyone around me, basically, because as I mentioned earlier, I had this idea and belief within my mind that change automatically means conflict, and that just because I'm changing, that somehow means that there's now conflict in my world, and that's just the way it is. But it took me a while to actually calm myself down and sort of release those ideas in my mind, to see and consider that change can also be just a very slow, step-by-step process, where I don't have to violently push myself and my reality to change, but where I just take a breath and I investigate and I dip my toe into all sorts of possibilities and ways that I can here and there change myself and my environment. It can be a very soft process. In fact, the more gentle you are with yourself and your environment, the more success you will have in actually changing something. I mean, that's actually just how it is in relationships. It's that when you approach things and you approach people with gentleness, you can have much more success, and you can get much more done, basically, and people will hear you than if you use violence and force.
Very, very important aspects that we have to also become aware of whenever we see any motivation for change through an emotional reaction or loud words and fighting and screaming. That is of the past century. I mean, we cannot, as human beings, continue allowing ourselves to consider that this is the real way of changing. Not at all. It's, as Kim is explaining, is like a decision that one makes as a human being, because we are seeing, you get to become aware of that, you know, things are not really working well here, so what's going on? Where have I not placed myself fully into understanding how the system operates? Where is my money really going? How is money being created? Why is the education system like this? Why are animals being abused? Why are we exterminating our resources when there are other technological options, for example, to not obliterate the earth in our necessity to consume energy? I mean, these are all aspects, and you and I have lived it through, wherein you start educating yourself, which is, yes, a process of dedication, and as Kim explained, you can take it at your own pace, meaning watching documentaries, reading blogs, reading forums out there. There's a lot of information in the Living Income Guaranteed blog post, website, in WordPress as well. So, I mean, it does take like that will, that decision to, I'm getting myself informed, but also becoming aware of then, as Kim is explaining, not associating that with antagonism, rebellion, stepping outside of the system. We really don't need that. We are already here, so we require to simply kind of straighten the current system that is already functional. We just see that it is not functioning for everyone at the best interest, meaning there are severe inequalities, severe problems toward animals, resources, etc. But what's lacking there is our own individual participation. So it's the will of acting in the best interest of ourselves and really getting to know how things work, which is self-education. So, Kim, just a last comment on this, self-education. Why do you see it is important when it comes to real activism, or a definition of practicalism?
Well, it's, for instance, in simply, for instance, the things that we brought up in this hangout is things that people are basically not aware of within themselves, of the reality of, for instance, how activism works and how we are or have been allowing ourselves to be fooled and duped into having this completely warped idea and concept of what change and what activism actually really means or could mean. So, I mean, simply that shows that we are not educated enough to really understand our reality. And so if we're not educated enough to understand our reality, then how are we ever going to be able to understand the problems or understand how to work on solutions? So self-education would be the first step towards creating solutions for any problem, be it in our personal environment, in our personal reality internally, as well as our external reality on an individual and global level.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and that's also what we pretty much encourage, and we also share here in this hangout. So I'd like to thank you for your time, for sharing with us this very important aspect to eradicate that negative image of change, of being an activist, and rather considering practical political solutions that really go into the core of the problem, which is economics, which is politics, which is what the Living Income Guaranteed is here for as a proposal. So if you agree with us, then join us, investigate further, and we are here gladly also able to discuss maybe in one hangout. If anyone wants to participate, you can contact us to discuss these points further. So thanks a lot, Kim, for your time, for being here.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Cool, and thanks to you, the viewer. We'll see you next week. Please remember that if you're watching this after the live session, you can still place comments, questions for Kim, myself, or anyone else, and let's get the discussion going. We'll see you next time, next Sunday at the same time. Take care. Bye-bye.